Hello, everybody, and welcome to In Conversation, the podcast where we explore the ideas, practices, and people shaping the future of academic publishing and the arts. In this episode, we turn our focus to the Journal of Contemporary Painting, a publication at the forefront of critical and creative discourse on painting today. As the journal also celebrates its 10th anniversary, it seems like a great time to reflect on both the journal's history, what it's going to be up to in the next sort of few years, but also on the evolving nature of the field more generally. So joining me today for this conversation are Rebecca Fortnum and Neil Clements, two of the journal's editors, or two people definitely associated with the journal. Rebecca and Neil, welcome to the show, and thank you both for being here. It's wonderful to have you on. How's things going?
Yeah, it's going good.
Thanks very much, James.
Well, brilliant. Well, it's great to have you both here, and let's start off with just a bit of a brief introduction. So Neil, let me start with you. Where are you calling in from, and what's your connection with the journal? And maybe just give us a little bit of your own background, whether you know what your connection to the journal is, but whether you're a teacher, an artist, that kind of thing.
Yeah, my name's Neil Clements, and I'm an artist and writer, and I'm based in Glasgow. I also am a lecturer in the Fine Art Critical Studies Department at the Glasgow School of Art, where I was until recently a colleague of Rebecca's. And in addition to that, I run a small artist-run gallery space called Ivory Towers in the city. I am also, as it was crucially for this, guest editing a special issue of the Journal of Contemporary Painting, focused primarily on the work of the late painter Carol Rhodes, Scottish painter Carol Rhodes.
Thank you very much, Neil. Rebecca, how are you connected with the journal, and where are you based, and what are you up to?
Well, I'm now based at Central St Martin's, where I'm acting Dean of C School, which is the school that includes fine art and performance and curating. But as Neil has said, previously I was head of the School of Fine Art in Glasgow. And before that, I was at the Royal College of Art. And before that, I was at Middlesex. And before that, I was at Campbell, Chelsea and Wimbledon, which is also part of the University of the Arts. And I mention that because that's where it started, where the journal started. When I was at Campbell, Chelsea and Wimbledon, I had a lovely colleague called Kate Elwes, Professor Kate Elwes, who had founded the Journal of Moving Image. I think it's called Mirage.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, and someone had come to her and said, where do I get critical writing on painting? And she came to me and asked me the question, and we sat there and pondered it and realized that there wasn't a journal on painting, even though we were aware that painting was one of the most popular courses. Everyone always predicts the death of painting, but actually it's an extremely popular course for art students and for artists. It's something that's I used to work in a sort of artists organization, and for women, and most of them were painters. At that time, that was in the 90s. So we realized that there was this absence, and went to the head of college and said, can we develop this idea? And so we put a proposal in, and I worked with my colleagues across UAL, Professor Mick Finch, who's still at Central St Martin's, Professor Dan Sturgis, who is now the principal editor, who's still at Campbell, and then at that time was Professor Beth Harland, who is a painter, but also in Lancaster University, and also Kelly Corpening, who's a professor now in the States, but was at UAL too. So, we developed this proposal. We were all practicing artists, so we weren't art historians. And so the kinds of articles that we were interested in were ones that were relevant to our own practices. So that's how it started. We did a big launch at the ICA. Our first edition was called Painting and Cinema. And right from the start, we wanted it to be quite visual because obviously academic journals aren't always visual. So we've always sort of tried to have more colour reproductions, bigger reproductions, whole page reproductions, rather than the little grainy black and white one that sometimes you get in academic publishing. So that would appeal to other artists. So we did painting and cinema. We approached a number of artists. I remember the New York painter Lydia Donor came over for the opening because we did a feature of her work, and we had a panel discussion. So yeah, that was the beginning.
Brilliant. Well, you've mentioned a few things there I wouldn't want to just kind of add on to. So you mentioned the large color reproductions, which I think is something the journal does very well. And that, I think, is the reason behind the odd format, right? Which, of course, most people will be accessing the publication online. But for anyone who does sort of buy a copy in print or has seen one over the years in print, and of course a lot of art galleries and places like that will buy them in that, it's kind of a landscape format, isn't it? So you can have larger color reproductions. So I think that really does make it stand out. And does that kind of foster I don't know, like kind of more visual essays and more practice-based research? Because again, you mentioned it's obviously coming out of a practice-based discipline, or certainly from your perspective and that of your colleagues who founded the journal. So is that one of the things that you've also tried to do, is to encourage non-traditional academic scholarship in different formats like visual essays and things of that nature?
Yeah, we've always had we've approached artists who aren't necessarily in academia at all to do visual essays, because we're really interested in how sequence and visuality work together, and the kinds of ways you can give information through the visual sequencing. And it's always very interesting when you come to see the synopsis of the visual essay when it gets translated into words. And the other thing that we did quite resolutely, and I think we're continuing to do it, maybe not in the issue that we're going to talk about, is we've developed something called the archival text. So it would be looking at an essay that's maybe out of print, or an essay that has been translated into English for the first time, and then gaining responses to it. So I guess it's whether, if you find a text that you think is very important, but perhaps has been overlooked in the contemporary field. We wrote to John Berger before he died and asked his permission to reprint one of his essays, and he very kindly gave us, he said we could reprint anything we liked, which is very, very, very John Berger. So we might look at something and think, well, this needs to be looked at now, and we'll bring that into a relationship with a contemporary writer, a contemporary artist, so to have that kind of response. So because we're aware, it's called contemporary painting, we only feature contemporary painting, but obviously there's a dialogue that happens all the time between contemporary painters and historical work. So in some ways that notion of the archival text sort of works with that.
Neil, let me bring you in here for a second. What was your first kind of interaction with the journal, and can you remember it being quite like a distinct and different publication? Did it kind of draw your eye, or what first drew you to it?
It's a good question. I think maybe the first issue of the journal I remember looking at in detail was the special issue devoted to the painter Simon Hantai, possibly. And I think there was almost two things running parallel. There was a degree of rigor in terms of, a sort of something devoted to, a painter who is, I suppose is kind of well known amongst other painters, but it's maybe less known kind of institutionally, certainly in the UK. And so I suppose it was interesting for me to see that degree of focus. And, I think also this sense that, I think one of the things that became very clear reading, reading essays that have been printed in that issue and others is that, you know, it really does kind of proceed from this point of view of practice, I suppose. And, you know, this idea of being a practicing painter and not having some sort of embodied, you know, there's some sort of embodied understanding there. And also a slightly different set of priorities, because I think what Rebecca's alluding to with, you know, this kind of, you know, maybe, you know, this sort of, the peculiarity of the sort of almost the priorities that a practicing artist brings to a subject, a discourse such as painting, rather than what an art historian might. There's just certain sorts of things that maybe, you know, are just handled slightly differently. And in a way, it's, you know, I think that was one of the things that really struck me immediately about the Journal of Contemporary Painting, was that it really kind of comes from this sort of perspective of practice.
Yeah, I mean, this Van Hontai edition is quite a good one. I think we were really proud. It was led by Mick Finch and Dan Sturgis, and you know, they felt they'd had, obviously Mick had lived in France and knew the work and knew the stature of the artist and knew the writing, because but it hadn't been translated then, so it was very much about bringing that work to a different audience, English speaking audience, and working with the family, with the estate on that. So I think, you know, there are thematic editions, and those will come, people will put proposals in, and we'll have a guest editor like Neil, who have particular expertise and interest. And then there'll be open editions where we're just, you know, we'll have heard about some exciting writing or project that we think would work in the journal, or people, you know, will submit proposals and finished articles. So we're kind of balancing between those two things, these kind of special focused editions that where we're in our editorial meetings, we're getting together and thinking, right, you know, what are the important issues, and with maybe who do we want to work with, who are the artists that really deserve this kind of focus that they haven't, a critical focus that maybe they haven't had yet, and then there'll be other times when we're just sort of going with what comes to us.
So you're really trying to engage with current topics that are affecting the discipline, as well as like key themes and things like that. And it sounds like you're doing that through a mixture of special themed issues, but then also for anyone who's interested in submitting to the journal, you also have like a general kind of call. So you're always like inviting and interested in different perspectives that relate to anything around contemporary painting. But it also sounds like you've had quite a few key focused issues over the years as well. Let me just ask you quickly, Rebecca, over the last sort of 10 years, you know, now that we're celebrating this kind of milestone, have there been any, you know, issues or any particular conversations or articles that really kind of just stand out to you, or maybe just any key themes that you think, wow, yeah, it's really important that we tackled that?
There was a really interesting issue a while back. Gosh, I can't tell you the date. And it was called Painting as Commitment.
Okay.
And it was really investigating the notion of an artist's commitment, a political position, and how that, because a lot of people think that painting is apolitical maybe, or it's bourgeois, or, you know, decorative, or... And I guess there was this sense, you know, as a painter, where might your responsibilities be? And that one was edited by Barbara Howie and Molly Thompson. And it brought up some really interesting issues. And I would say that because it's the only time I've actually published in the journal, but I did publish an essay about painting and feminism, which was something that I really wanted to think about. And
that's the sign of a strong journal and a good editor. You shouldn't have too many of your own pieces in a journal that you edit, that's for sure.
No, hardly ever. It was guest edited, but what was really interesting was going through, we have quite a rigorous peer review and going through the peer review, you know, it's not for everyone, but it tends to make the articles better. My article was definitely better at the end than it was at the beginning, because I had some very incisive and quite critical review on it. But anyway, so that, I thought that was quite, it was quite an interesting way of drawing together lots of different practices. I mean, remember we had David Mabb did the visual essay for it, which was really interesting. So that was a good one. The last one that I was more involved with was painting as correspondence. And that, again, was quite interesting because we were trying to think about sort of two aspects of correspondence. It was actually based around letters between Claudette Johnson and Lubaina Himid. And realizing that in order to tell a particular story of Black painting by women, they had to pick a particular mode of letter writing which allowed them to tell a kind of autobiographical story, a story where they were, their investments were clear, but also was very intimate and allowed the reader into this discussion about why they chose to make work in the way that they did, and then how that's evolved over the years. So that was a really interesting way of thinking about painting as a response. So how it corresponds to others, or even to the world. So this notion of looking at the world and making a mark on your canvas that will relate to the world. So we explored that whole notion of, from letter writing to marks and representation within the edition. So that was the kind of, it was maybe more speculative and less scholarly than perhaps some of the other issues, but that was the joy of working things through over an issue, as you can take these different approaches.
Thank you, Rebecca. Neil, let me just get your take on a couple of things here before we jump into the special issue. I thought it might be interesting to just have a little think about, sort of, especially in light of what Rebecca's just said about her experiences with peer review. And of course, peer review is so important to these scholarly journals. But when you're dealing with practice-based disciplines, there must always be a bit of a friction there, where, especially if you're working with people from the creative arts, and then you're having to sort of impose these quite rigorous review kind of peer review settings on their work. So it makes me think about, what do you think the role of academic and independent journals play in shaping conversations around contemporary art and painting? Are they always being responsive, or are they kind of actually pushing like people's perspectives? Because it sounds like with this journal in particular, you're getting a number of actual painters and practitioners who are engaging with it at the editorial level and also as contributors. So it seems to be building bridges. But is that the case, do you think, with these types of journals, or are they always kind of out there on the outside?
I think that it's a really valuable sort of space, in that, quite often discussions of painting, this is something Rebecca's kind of alluded to already, are kind of subject to sort of capture, really, and instrumentalization by a variety of different sort of, institutional interests, really. And so actually having, a sort of, there is almost a kind of a type of writing which artists make. I mean, this is maybe a generalization, but I think there's a kind of, there's a certain sort of clarity and a certain sort of honesty in artists writing about the practice of making art. And I think that, actually providing sort of, but then as you sort of alluded to, I think a lot of people, although there are a lot of people publishing journals such as the Journal of Contemporary Painting, who have tenured academic positions and who are sort of, very familiar with that kind of the terrain of, of sort of submitting articles or essays to journals. I think there is also, there is definitely a certain open conversation that's being had about what the kind of the correct sort of tenor one needs to adopt when sort of talking about practice, really. And I think that's something that, I think we're still really kind of, sort of working it out. And actually, it's only really if you have these kind of forums that you can sort of do that.
I think, yeah, it's a good point, Neil. And what do you think, Rebecca? What are the kind of the purpose of these types of journals? Do you think they're about building bridges between practitioners and these other audiences, or are they pushing the field? What's the kind of purpose?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, in the time that the journal's been operating, the notion of artistic research has shifted quite considerably, and the ways in which research can be acceptably articulated, has changed. And well, Neil can talk a bit more about it, but definitely within the edition that he's edited recently, you can see that. And I think there's a sense in which the suggestive or the fictive or the imagined or the reimagined, has a place in academic discussion in a way that it probably didn't. I think we were all working to a kind of standard that needed to be challenged, really. You can see that about the discussions around citation and models of authority in academic writing, and I guess as a painter, you've always got that as a test. Does it make sense to me as a painter? So it's not like you're creating for its own, for its own sake. But you might find that writing, something that's more of a story might answer the questions of the painting or the questions in the painting more acutely than, if you were to write around it in a seemingly objective manner. So I think that it's not about building a bridge necessarily. It's about that test. Does it make sense either as a painter painting or as an audience looking at a painting? And if it does, then we'd like to include it.
Neil, that feels like a good segue into this special issue that you've been responsible for editing. So can you just explain to our audience what the theme of the special issue is? Just give us that sort of in like a nutshell, and then let us know what it's all about.
Yes, so this special issue of the Journal of Contemporary Painting focuses on the work of the painter Carol Rhodes, who was based in Glasgow for most of her life and passed away in 2018. And it is the direct result of a symposium which took place at the Glasgow School of Art, which Rebecca was responsible for initiating, which I kind of sort of helped mount program, and the special issue features sort of updated versions of many of the presentations that took place at that 2024 symposium. And a lot of as maybe Rebecca was saying about almost the different sort of approaches to how one actually, the sort of voice, that's adopted when you write about painting, and a number of the texts that will appear in this issue are pieces of autofiction or creative writing, which take this perspective of the kind of paintings of Carol Rhodes as a starting point, really. And so Rhodes was known for having developed a pretty unique form of landscape painting, which were really these assemblages which contained lots of historical references. They were sort of gleaned from all sorts of sources. They always take a kind of an aerial perspective. They're always landscapes that are seen from above, but these are not real landscapes. They're sort of landscapes that are kind of constructed, very painstakingly constructed from a variety of different sources. And so the kind of premise of the issue was to try and sort of further at a time when actually there's a great deal of critical interest in institutional shows of her work, to sort of try and generate some scholarship around that.
Awesome.
And so we should say about that, I mean, one of the things that we set up prior to the symposium were, because we were working with her estate and her archive, well, Neil set it up, was access bursaries so that writers and artists could access her estate.
Oh.
And look at these things, go into her studio, because her studio remained pretty much as she left it, and to really understand her working process. And so we had a painter going in, we had a writer going in, we had a scholarship, there's original scholarship from this kind of observation, so this kind of first-hand observation. Because what we wanted to do is, we were aware that there was a certain amount of scholarship around her work, but we really wanted the conference to engender more critical thinking about her work, because we could see that it would gain by it, that everything that was to be written had not yet been written for sure with her work. And I've been a big fan of her work for years, so coming to Glasgow, and she taught at the art school for a number of years, so working with colleagues who've been taught by her or taught alongside her, and I think I was probably the only person involved in it that hadn't ever met her. You had this different kind of perspective, and you could overlay her life, her activist life, which was something that had been hinted in a lot of articles, but not really brought into a relationship with her painting. And then you had all this material, and as Neil says, very the reference material gathered in the studio and used to construct the paintings. So, and she was such a thoughtful, interesting, sort of informed painter, that that when you start thinking about her own decision making, you're going to come up with something quite interesting.
Let me ask you a couple of questions then. It sounds like two fascinating things. The work itself has affected almost the format and the layout of the types of articles and essays that you've included in the issue, which I think is a really important point, and shows how you're trying to break down some of these traditional boundaries and open up to different ways of discussing artworks. And then also, so everyone who's involved, who developed a sort of an essay, they're in response to the studio, so they spend time in the environment. Is that right?
It wasn't everybody, but we had 3 articles that emerged from the bursaries, didn't we, Neil?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's the 3. There was 3 bursary holders. Dr. Paul Perroni, who is working in the art history department at Edinburgh University, or the University of Edinburgh. Rosie Roberts, who is a writer, and Dr. Sin Park, who is a practicing painter. And they each sort of almost found very distinct elements within the archive and studio. Sin wrote, I produced a visual essay, which is the first scholarship on the painting notes that Carol minted, these kind of very voluminous painting notes that Carol maintained when working on a board, and so that seemed a really important priority, to sort of focus some attention on that, because that was a huge gap in the scholarship. Paul Perroni's article looks at the history of the Glasgow Garden Festival, which, as I recall, was in 1988, which was something that Carol was involved in protesting against. Mm-hmm. But and primarily, it looks at this idea of the sort of an aerial perspective that was used to kind of advertise the festival as this new site. And finally, Rosie Roberts has produced a number of almost pieces of writing which are almost like vignettes, which seek to replicate sort of the mood of specific paintings by Carol. And that's a very experimental piece. And I think it's really important that in addition to these kind of more conventional sort of scholarly appraisals of the work, that we kind of acknowledge something which is a strange sort of occurrence in the last couple of years, is a variety of people producing creative writing have become very interested in Carol and her as an example. And I think maybe because of the fact that she graduates art school in the early 1980s as a painting student, and promptly stops painting and becomes involved in political activism, you know, and there's sort of, you know, sort of images surfacing of her being, you know, forcibly removed from Greenham Common and things like that, before, after an 8-year sort of interregnum, returning to painting and establishing this quite incredible career. And I think that, you know, a lot of younger writers are sort of particularly, I think maybe at the moment, a lot of people are sort of beginning to think about how their personal politics relate to their practices, that, you know, that Carol has become this kind of example through which they can navigate their own thoughts. And so the three bursary holders each had quite distinct kind of angles on the kind of the material that was there, and that was supplemented by a number of other academics that spoke at the symposium.
It sounds a lot like Carol's legacy is very rich. Would you sort of describe it a little bit more? You've mentioned their sort of personal politics and people reflecting on their own art practice. Is that a big part of Carol's legacy for you then, Neil?
I think so. I mean, it's difficult because in her own statements on her practice, Carol was quite hesitant to sort of ascribe a political function to her work. And, you know, it's important to kind of respect her her own thoughts on what her works did. But it's been interesting to see how almost there becomes multiple Carols. And there's different, you know, the practice, I think largely because of the quality of the paintings, the practice sort of means different things for different people. And then sort of trying to sort of produce a response to it, it seemed that this kind of polyvalent sort of nature of, you know, these different ways the works could be read seemed to be an important thing to embrace, rather than to kind of, you know, the sort of control, really. And I think that was part of the, you know, one of the things that was most interesting about the open call that preceded the symposium was the range of the range of proposals that we got back.
Rebecca, what about you? What's your connection with Carol, and what's your sort of take on her legacy, and why this, you know, this is such an important topic to be discussed in the journal?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, you know, a bit like we were talking with Simon Hontai, you know, Carol is a painter, I think, and although you know, very well respected in Scotland and the UK, there is also a sense that she deserves wider recognition, I think. So I think for us it was about ensuring that there was the kind of critical reflection there, and that the scholarship was being shored up for the future. Because I think, from, you know, my connection to her is that ever since I saw her work, I admired it, and I continued to see her work from you know, over the last 20 years, and haven't seen as much of it as I think I should have done. And although she's been present in all the surveys of contemporary Scottish painting, you know, that at the time, there's always this worry that someone might not get their due somehow. So for me, it was just about investing in that, of somebody who I saw as an extremely significant painter. And you know, there's something about her paintings, as Neil was saying, you know, that these are, we can talk about them as landscape painting, and people do, and they do in the journal, they talk about landscape paintings, but there's also an abstract quality to them, which is about kind of design on a surface, which makes them very ambivalent in terms of their genre, or what it is we're looking at. And they seem to have come into their own even more. We can't turn on the telly now without seeing a drone photography, right? It's like every series that's there, you'll have it at the start, the end, the beginning, the beginning and the end, and in the middle. So there's something about this aerial view that even since Carol's death has become much more prevalent and needed greater scrutiny now, I think, within our current sort of visual imagery that we're living with. So that's why I was really wanted to do it when I was in Glasgow, and I'm very grateful to Neil for sort of pushing it through and getting this new writing. And I think also the Andrew and Merlin that represent her estate were allowed that to happen for us because of giving this sort of additional access. And also, the people who know her work best, were having sort of critical eyes on what we were doing. So there was a sense that we really had to make sure we were going to produce the goods, really.
That sounds like a fantastic opportunity, and I imagine when you're working with contemporary artists or artists who've recently passed, it can be quite problematic to gain access to the estate. So it sounds like that was a really important part of this process, both in terms of those three contributions you highlighted, but just in terms of the whole process. Neil, would you speak a little bit more about the importance of the archive, and then also it'd be good to get your take on some of the sort of challenges that you faced sort of taking on this topic and editing this specific issue of the journal.
Yeah, I think that like artist archives are fascinating places to sort of situate yourself in terms of producing scholarship. And I think that quite often, you become very easily forced back onto a position where you're producing scholarship on existing scholarship. And there's something really falls away when especially if you're in a studio and you're able to sort of see paintings which were abandoned before completion, this voluminous the kind of the note keeping, it's obviously, it depends on the artist. With Carol's work specifically, we were very fortunate in that she was very scrupulous about the way that she made work. She made work very slowly. She didn't make, by sort of most people's standards, she didn't make a great many works. I think this maybe contributes to what Rebecca's saying about the kind of the limits of where they've appeared. And so, yeah, this kind of idea of the archive just is so it sort of gives you a sort of an insight that really is just remarkable, frankly. I think that I don't think that, yeah, it provided a kind of a spur for types of writing which just simply wouldn't have happened otherwise. I think in terms of, we were sort of asking about the challenges. I think one of the kind of really heartening things about the process of first organizing the symposium and then later sort of taking submissions for that and working with authors to kind of generate essays that were being peer-reviewed essays would be included in the journal, was that a lot of people, not everyone, but there was a number of contributors who were students of Carol's in the painting department at the Glasgow School of Art, and and not an insignificant number of those people are not kind of used to publishing with academic journals. And so I think that one of the things that we've been sort of talking about a lot is how to best support those individuals and how to kind of through a process of peer review. And, because I think it's really important actually that these perspectives are being kind of brought into the journal, but then that obviously sort of requires, the sort of like a kind of, you need to act as an interlocutor to make sure that, everything is sort of, everyone's on the same page, really.
Yeah, it can be quite the challenge, can't it? And what about you, Rebecca? What was your kind of involvement in this issue? And did you, were there any unique challenges, or is it kind of business as usual as far as you were concerned in terms of, working with different authors and perspectives and putting together a peer-reviewed special issue?
I think I was sort of cheering from the sidelines, really.
Often the best place to be.
Cheering Neil on, but you know, I guess right at the beginning, you know, there was this sense that we could do something. You know, when I was in Glasgow, that we could do something there, and then I think right at the beginning we wanted to make sure that the work from the symposium had a home in the journal. And you know, it was one of the quickest decisions the board made that we would do this edition, because everybody involved in the journal admired her work. I think the challenge of asking people to submit to a journal, to submit to a process that they may not be used to, but retain that thing that's really important to why they wanted to write in the first place, is a challenge for the editor. I think Neil worked really well with the contributors to ensure that their voices were there, but also it was intelligible to you know, whoever was reading it, whether you know Carol's work or not, because I think that's really important, that it couldn't just rely on this kind of insider sort of sense or knowledge of the artist. And so I think it's you know, a really, really good edition. I don't think you'd be able to write about Carol without having read this issue, which is really important to us, that we're contributing in that way, that the journal contributes in that way, that becomes, you know, something when we take on a theme that whoever you know, the researchers and scholars that come later will really need to reference that journal. But I really like the way it moves between, you know, quite sort of standard academic writing that says new things that haven't been said before, to other forms of writing and visual information that will give you a slightly different take on the artist.
I think it's a fantastic issue, and I think people are going to go crazy for it, to be honest with you. I think you really have managed to build a really interesting issue around some different topics. And I think you've taken on those challenges really, really well. I wanted to ask a question, though, for anyone who maybe isn't so familiar with Carol's work. How might they best engage with Carol's work? Is there any exhibitions? Are there any, you know, permanent collections? I mean, beyond reading, of course, the journal, what other options are there out there, Neil? Any, you know?
I mean, one of the things, it's a shame it comes down this weekend, but Alison Jake's Gallery in London have an exhibition, a solo exhibition of Carol's work, which is until Sunday. But it's maybe too short for any listeners to short enough for any listeners to make it to. Her work is very well represented in British institutions. You know, I think that the Tate own a number of works, I believe, as do the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art. And I mean, I think, yeah, I think
there's
you
definitely
know,
one on display in Edinburgh. I've seen it recently.
Yeah, there's two paintings, I believe, that are on display right now in Edinburgh. And yeah, I think it's the issue comes out of it's seemingly quite an opportune moment, in that, you know, I think it's been fascinating that Carol's work has been featured recently in a large exhibition of work at Raven Row in London, where most of the other participants were contemporary artists rather than contemporary painters. And you know, these are individuals mainly under the age of 40. And, you know, I think Carol is sort of, you know, is moving in a variety of different directions at once. She's just been the subject of two sort of surveys, one at the Phantom Museum in Maastricht and another at Haus am Waldsee in Berlin. And, you know, I think that there's this kind of sense of almost the international, that a growing international interest in the work. But as Rebecca was sort of saying about the kind of responses in the journal, I think it's both important to consider the specific kind of material sort of connections that that Carol had to, you know, the kind of the city that surrounded her, but also actually just as crucially to open that up to kind of interpretations about how her work fits into these kind of narratives of contemporary painting more generally. And so you're sort of trying to do these two things at once. But I think that, yeah, certainly anyone that finds himself in Edinburgh, there's a very fine painting up at the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that, Neil, and Rebecca too. Did you struggle to get international perspectives? I mean, you mentioned there's a couple of galleries in Europe there that have the work, but was that a struggle when you were, putting out the call for papers and you were engaging with different contributors? Was it more difficult? Because you were talking about one of the main goals of the issue itself being to present Carol's work to a more international audience and community, and to develop a sort of presence on that stage. Was that a challenge?
To an extent, I think that we had a keynote presentation by Paula van den Bosch, who's the head curator at the Bonnefanten Museum in Maastricht, who reflected on working with Carol's estate on the exhibition there. I think that maybe one of the things that I think is really great about the Journal of Contemporary Painting is I think it does have an international readership. And I'm hoping that actually, in terms of, when you think about the kind of logistics of symposia, and conferences, it's really kind of contingent on, who you can kind of get to a location on a specific day. Whereas actually what I think is, what's been really kind of heartening about taking this corpus of material, which was really promising, and sort of, further developing it into these kind of submissions that, comprise this issue of the journal is the fact that I think it will sort of, I'm hoping will sort of provide that kind of international reach.
Thank you, Neil. And Rebecca, let's talk a little bit about the journal again, just more in general. Are there any other themed issues or anything on the horizon that people might want to be aware of, or is there any, I don't know, is there anything that you're looking to engage with? And I know that you're kind of handing over the reins, but is there anything over the next few years that you would like the journal to tackle, or any other artists or themes that you think would be a great opportunity for someone to pick a special issue for?
Well, I know an edition that's underway at the moment, I'm not quite sure how underway it is Painting in the Curatorial. And that's been developed by Moira Darby and Alison Green. And I think that, again, it was one of those areas where people sort of pricked up their ears and thought this seems very relevant now. So they issued an open call. They had an online symposium, and then they're developing the edition from that. I'm just working with some colleagues at University of the Arts London on one called Painting, I can't remember if it's called Painting in Garments or Painted Garments. So it's about relationship between painting, textile, clothing, fashion, and painting.
Interesting.
And again, I think that they're doing an exhibition, and the edition is going to come out of that. So there's, I think at any one time, we're picking up on what's in the air and developing it. Our journals take quite a long time.
Yeah, and that's the nature of the beast.
From start to finish, it's a couple of years. So we have to make sure that we have topics that are sustainable over that period. They're not just sort of faddy. But I think those two are going to be quite exciting developments for future issues.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, you do highlight a bit of a challenge there of journal publishing. Even if they have online first publishing opportunities, you're still often talking about something that is there for the archive, isn't it? That hopefully it does really present cutting edge research delivered in really interesting ways, but sometimes it's almost like a slightly delayed response to the actual moment itself, which is why I think there also is a real strength in having them, these issues focused around, exhibitions, because it really gives a lot more life and longevity to those exhibitions and to the work reflected. Neil, any topics or themes or special issues that you would like to see maybe the journal tackle over the next year or so? Anything that you think is going to be important affecting contemporary painting? And that's a bit of a tricky one. I put you on the spot there with that, but
well, I think that we're sort of seeing a variety of things have happened in kind of contemporary painting in the last few years. We've seen a kind of a huge resurgence of interest in figurative painting, representational painting, and certain sort of arguments being kind of made for and against that. I think that that's definitely something which, it seems to be in the air and being kind of talked about, but I think, maybe what's kind of maybe absent at present is a more detailed and thorough sort of analysis of really what's kind of produced that shift, or what, because it's really kind of, that's something that's, in a way, what we're doing is sort of, reacting to things that you see. It's just a matter, it's what you sort of, when you go to a gallery, what you're sort of saying, what's anyone that's graduating from an art school, from an undergraduate or postgraduate course, now what are they making, what are they drawn to, and yeah, so I think that might be a sort of something I would like to sort of see.
Yeah, and that's it's really interesting point, Neil, because I think all of us who are involved in putting the journal together are also teaching younger artists. So all the time we're in touch with what they are thinking is relevant or important. And so there is a lot kind of intergenerational, because each generation has its do's and don'ts in terms of painting, right? So I came through when there was this big, are you abstract or figurative divide, which seems utterly irrelevant now, but was a big deal at the time. So I think it's really interesting that we're not just going to see exhibitions, but also seeing what our students do, who are in their early 20s or whatever, and what's relevant to them, and we're testing it against that.
Let me just add to that then as well, that there's something that is kind of a bit of a myth that associated around journals, and especially around these practice-based ones as well, is that, you need to have a PhD or you need to have a certain amount of publishing experience before you can submit. Obviously, experience is important, but it's hard to get that if you don't actually have a crack, right? So I think it's worth saying that this journal supports new and emerging scholarship, as well as new and emerging sort of disciplines within the field of contemporary painting, and that people shouldn't shy away from submitting their work to those general calls or to themed issues, or to go into these galleries and responding to the work they see in front of them. And this would be a great home for that, especially if you're looking to develop practice-based or practice-led writing in a scholarly way.
Yeah, I mean, we do a review section, and so we've quite often, when people are thinking about doing a long article but they haven't really done it before, we'll say, well, why don't you do a review of something you're really interested in, and that will be like a good test, because the reviews still go through peer review.
Yeah.
And you'll see what the mechanism is and how long it takes and what kind of engagement is, and usually write about something you like rather than something you don't like, because people are generally better at writing good things than bad things. You have to be really good writer to write bad review, right?
Yeah, right. You have to be confident at least, anyway.
So anyway, so I think we definitely working with, obviously with our own research students, but also with the master's students and even undergraduate students that are sort of that way inclined, and we're happy to receive things, particularly from places that we're not visiting ourselves. So if there's reviews of exhibitions in far-flung places, that's really good for us.
Oh, very good point. Like, we want those international reviews from small gallery spaces, exhibitions, etc., all over the world. So yeah, don't shy away. International also is vitally important to this journal as well, isn't it? I should just say to the audience that Rebecca has just given you one of the ultimate journal cheat codes there. I think this notion of submitting a review, because it does build this relationship with the journal, the editorial team. You guys are often desperate for interesting and innovative reviews, as well as a number of books and things that will need to be reviewed, exhibitions, specific artworks and texts and things of that nature. So it's a real important part of the journal and of journals in general. So if anyone is looking to publish their first piece, a review would be a great start, I think. Neil, did you have anything to add, or is there any top tips that you might have, having just gone through this process of guest editing a journal, that maybe for even for budding editors, or or for anyone who's looking to submit to an academic journal who comes, from a practice-based or a curatorial background?
Yeah, I think all I would say is that while experience is something that's, important, we can't deny that. I think the most important thing is having a perspective. And I think that one of the things about, practicing artists is they all have a kind of, a perspective on what it is they're making and what it is that, the artworks that surround them, their thoughts about how they were made. And I think it's about, I would just advise everyone to sort of think about, what it is they want to say and, how to situate it in relationship to what's been said before, rather than think, because I think one of the advantages of the kind of peer review process is that, while it can be, quite challenging, it is also a kind of a way of kind of assisting you to get to that point where, it's all it's in the kind of, it's of the kind of the quality it should be.
Yeah, I mean, we're not interested in peer reviews that are just about power plays or, all of the peer reviews that we pass on to our contributors are in the spirit of construction, constructive criticism. So, have you thought about it from this perspective? Would it be better if you added this, that kind of thing? And I've never seen it not make a piece of writing better.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Across our 108 journals, publications, it's something that we really try to push for, that collegial, constructive approach. We don't want, like you say, power plays or people who are representatives of a specific theory getting agitated about someone deconstructing that specific theory or whatever. So yeah, I think but my, from my perspective, it really does help and improve. Not only like the specific article, but also writing for journals, specific mode, isn't it, as well? It's, even though, with your journal, there's a lot of opportunity for experimentation, you're still writing for a certain audience and there's certain things that need to be conveyed regardless of what kind of format you're utilizing. And that's a real challenge. And I think that's where the peer review can also be really beneficial to help, guide people's kind of tone, style, and develop their writing for this specific format. Not just, the kind of content and is to have enough international perspectives or have you engaged with it, enough different things here, there, or everywhere, but also just that kind of writing for that mode. I had one final question for you guys before I'll let you get on with your days. And we've spoken a bit about contemporary painting in general, and then of course with Carol's work that it was maybe has been underrepresented, especially globally. So are there any contemporary painters that you guys are engaging with at the moment? I know this is another one straight off the to throw you, I don't want to throw you under the bus, but is there anyone that you've seen recently or anyone's work you've engaged with that you'd like to highlight for our audience today, so that we can maybe give them a bit of a head start before someone does a special themed issue on their work in years to come?
I'm quite interested. I'm currently speaking with, part of my role at the Glasgow School of Art is programming a sequence of talks called the Friday Event, which is has been in operation for 32 years now. And I'm quite excited about inviting a Frankfurt-based painter called Jana Euler to Glasgow to speak in February. And I think that that's very important work, and it's kind of very challenging work. And yeah, I'm really interested to see what she says.
That's actually a great answer, because that's really interesting. It also shows, I think, you've both mentioned the Glasgow School of Art today, on a few different occasions in different contexts, and I think it's fair to say that the Glasgow School of Art has like a really important place in British culture, but it sounds like they're doing some really important work still. Is that the case, Neil? And maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what's your role in that.
Yeah, I think it's one of the sort of specific it's the qualities of teaching in a Scottish art school, I suppose. Is this really, obviously you have this relationship to to London art schools, and you're thinking very carefully about that. But then I think it's also for many decades we've cultivated relationships with schools in Germany, schools in America, a great many other places. And I think it's maybe kind of balancing this this kind of reflection on how the school sits in relationship to the rest of the UK, higher education in the rest of the UK, but also how you could kind of maybe situate it both in Europe and more broadly internationally. And so kind of parts of the, said it's always, I think it's maybe to go back to this thing about, maybe a kind of perspective that's bound up in the Journal of Contemporary Painting. It's always really, I think, great to hear from the artists themselves and to not have that layer of mediation. And so it's quite often, I think one of the best ways to sort of, to motivate, to kind of inspire students is actually to kind of just put other artists in front of them, really.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Rebecca, I know that you have a strong connection with the Glasgow School of Art as well, but what about Central St Martin's, and what kind of role does Central St Martin's play in like sort of developing contemporary painting? I think you probably have a number of exhibitions and things that take place on an annual basis. Would you just tell us a little bit about some of those?
Yeah, so in Central St Martin's, in the art course there, it's organised around 2D, 3D, 4D, and XD, which means sort of external site-specific work or working with different communities. And so you'd expect 2D to have the painting in it, but of course it doesn't. So these are kind of very loose groupings, and the students there make work in whatever material or form that's relevant to their ideas. So every year you'll get some quite significant painting emerging from both undergraduate and postgraduate courses. And I as a dean, I'm not allowed to favour one over another, but of course I go around looking at the painting because that's the medium that I work in. So this and actually some of the interesting things about that is you've got paintings that are maybe displayed in a particular way or are placed alongside films or photographs or objects. So you've got painting in dialogue with other things. It's not exclusively painting, or this sense that painting is, the historical sense of painting being the highest art, as it were, and that in a way is kind of tests what painting does, what this particular form of image making does. So our shows, we have them annually, and they always display new things, unexpected things within the field of painting.
Well, thank you both for sharing those anecdotes with me today, and thanks very much for your time. I really appreciate you both coming and joining us on the podcast and talking about the Journal of Contemporary Painting and about this special issue on Carol Rhodes, which will be coming. Is it before the end of this year that one will be? It is. Yeah. It's coming imminently, isn't it? And of course, Volume 10, issues 1 and 2 are currently available as well, so I do urge everyone to go and check that out. And if you want to find out more about the Journal of Contemporary Painting, do visit intellectbooks.com and go and check out Journal of Contemporary Painting, where you can see the call for papers for any of the special themed issues. You can, of course, submit one of those reviews that we were talking about, or you can submit a different kind of article, all kinds of information there. And that, of course, will be where the special themed issue will be posted as well. So do keep an eye on that. Again, thank you so much for your time today. It was wonderful having you both on. Any final thoughts or any final messages before we leave the call?
No, I mean, it was great. It was great to talk to you, James. And, I do think I am really proud of this issue. And I think Neil has really done what we set out to do. So thanks for making it a bit more public.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, James.
Well, a huge congratulations to you, Neil, to all the contributors, and again to Rebecca and all the team behind the Journal of Contemporary Painting. Congratulations on a fantastic 10 years. I'm really excited to see what you do in the next 10, especially as a lot of the topics and things you've discussed have become much more mainstream. So I'm interested to see where you take it next. And Neil, yeah, great special issue and a really important one. So can't wait to spend a bit more time with that myself as well. Thank you both for your time today, and to all our listeners, we'll catch you next time on In Conversation. Thank you and goodbye.